And then his dick game is weak. He never even pulls it out. Like, what is up, BookTube? It feels like it's been a really long time since I've sat down to film a proper video, even though this past week, you might have noticed, if you've gone on my channel, I've gone live every day to buddy read this book, and at the start of that experiment, I was like, I'm not going to come back here and do a standalone video because I've spent 10 hours here talking about it. I reacted live with all of you. You've seen my reactions. My Goodreads reviews typically go up as soon as I'm done reading something. I don't typically hold on to those. I just don't find that to be a fun process for me, but I also don't spend a lot of time editing them and going into all of that. So they tend to be first impression centric, but I did get a couple of people who are like, I can't wait, or I'm interested to see a actual review. And so I'm going to try and make this not an hour long, but I do sometimes enjoy some long form content. I think that we all know that. So if this does end up being a little bit on the longer side, I apologize. But if it wasn't at all clear from the title and the thumbnail and everything, I will be talking about Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, properly titled House of Earth and Blood. Let's get into this. Now, just in the essence of getting straight to the point, because like I said, I've talked about this book for 10 hours of my life already. I think it's an okay read. If you don't know, this is her most recent release. It is marketed as an adult fantasy kickoff to a series wherein we follow our main character, Bryce Quinlan, who is investigating the murder of a close group of friends. That's sort of the bare bones description, and I think that while the book is not terrible, where it falls apart is in the execution. And just, again, to remain non-spoilery for a little bit longer, I think that the writing wasn't an issue for me. The character development I thought was rather weak. I've seen a couple of people, there's a lot of people who rated this really well, and they seem to think that there is I don't want to say excellent, I don't want to like put words in people's mouths, but they were able to appreciate a dialogue in relation to trauma that I think was absent from the narrative. But overall, I think a lot of the characters felt very static to me. I felt that most of the characters didn't really progress from where we met them. And in the case of Bryce, I actually felt that she was more regressive. I also felt that the world building was, I don't want to say confusing, because I don't think really anything in the book was confusing. Although if you were following along on Twitter, you will have noticed that there were some reading comprehension errors that I was making during my read of this. But I don't think the world construction was confusing. I think that the aesthetic of what you imagine an urban fantasy to be and the effort that Sarah J. Maas put in are incompatible. I think that when you think urban fantasy, you think our world, supernatural creatures, you think our world, but you know, like just our world. But Sarah J. Maas goes through the effort of creating an entirely new continent, an entire, like this landmass and this history that pulls from our culture and kind of hodgepodges them together to create her own, which is what you do in a fantasy. And I will say it seemed to be, to me, that she was pulling exclusively from white cultures. So there's some Norse references, some Celtic references, some just general Christian references, some Greek references. None of her references felt appropriative, but they felt confusing in that it never felt like our world. It felt very, like there was, you know, guns and cars and cell phones and internet, but there was still this medieval fantasy aesthetic to some of the city, and that's partly, you know, due to the fact that it's an older city. Maybe if you live in like the UK or maybe somewhere in like New England, you're like maybe Boston, I don't know. I've never lived in a city that had, you know, very still significantly old building aesthetics mashed up with a modern steel skyscraper. So for me, it felt like this world and the history that we were like, we would get bits and pieces of information just to prove that Sarah had thought of these things, but they weren't actually important to the narrative. So the construction of the world just felt at odds to me. And so before I get into spoilers or anything, I want to say that House of Earth and Blood feels like a lot of other fantasy series done worse. And I say that because I think that part of the world, like the technology, the aesthetics of the world, the modernity of it, the modern aspects mixed with the fantasy setting, I think it's done much better in a book like Steel Crow Saga by Paul Kruger. To be fair, the industrialization, the modernization of this book is set earlier, so it's like a 1920s vibe, turn of the early 19th century. Like, there's no one's whipping out cell phones, there's no Skype calling, but I feel like it handles modern technology, or at least modern for a fantasy, it's more advanced than like a Game of Thrones situation. With the fantasy aspects much better than this does. I think that this just felt more integrated and organic in a way that this just felt clunky and outdated. I also think that the murder mystery element gave me lots of Lady Midnight vibes, and while I've talked at length about my hatred or my distaste for the Dark Artifices series as a whole, I think that the murder mystery was done here much better. I think that Cassandra Clare is working in a very similar wheelhouse that Sarah J. Maas is operating in this one. And I also think that Cassandra Clare was able to illustrate her murder mystery in 600 pages. So this argument, I think, that I've seen some people make that, the book had to be longer to accommodate this plot line, I think, is just wholly inept. And I would also say that Crescent City gave me major Cruel Prince vibes, and I think that The Cruel Prince was just a better book, even though it's another series that I didn't actually appreciate or enjoy. And The Cruel Prince is another fantasy where it's in our modern age and stuff. So I think that Sarah J. Maas went out of her way to create this world, and I think that some of the things that she created are interesting, but I think that ultimately she never really utilized them to their full potential. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk spoilers. So I picked this book up twice. The first time I picked it up, it was not part of my live stream. I read 25 pages and I set it down. I was getting major sapphic vibes between Bryce Quinlan and Danica Fetter. I think that Danica is probably the only character in the entirety of the novel that becomes more complex and more interesting as the story goes on. I think that Bryce, she was not at all ever interesting to me. So I think that having Danica die so early on was kind of an issue for me, because I felt that the first 100 pages served literally no purpose. I felt that that information that Danica was going to die was revealed in literally, it's in the cover copy, it's in the synopsis. You know that it just says close friends. But so when the entire Den of Wolves is literally shredded apart and left for dead, the emotional impact I felt was still there. I was still like, oh, that's kind of fucked up. But it's broadcast in the synopsis. So the first 90 pages really reads like a bunch of preface material. And so the idea that Sarah J. Maas could write a 90-page prologue, I felt was just, I can't support that. So for an eighth of the book to be prologue material, roughly, we're not doing mathematics here, I thought was really poor judgment. I also felt that the Bryce Quinlan that we met in the prologue material was significantly different than the Bryce that we met in the actual story that starts on page 92 or whatever. So the prologue material, and even a couple pages after that, they introduce this idea of this human resistance that you're kind of led to believe is going to play into the overarching narrative that's going to be told here, that they're going to have some kind of important role. And after the prologue material, humans don't really show up at all. So I don't understand why I guess it's a red herring that was there, but after the prologue, it's very clear that the humans had nothing to do with Danica's death or the death of anyone else. So I also felt that the prologue material established a lot of characters as being super special. The first hint, because I read the synopsis like a year ago when I added it to Goodreads. I didn't check it out again until I was like, I feel like this character is gonna die. But Danica's established as being the most powerful character to ever exist in the face of reality. Hunt is acknowledged as being the most powerful character to ever exist in the face of reality. And while Bryce at the beginning of the novel is not presented as the most powerful character in all of reality, there's still something super special about her. So right off the bat, we had 3 characters who seem to be the most special of specialness that you could ever exist within their chosen categories, because none of them are the same creature. Danica was the shifter. Hunt is obviously an angel. People are speculating he's like the devil's son. Like, I don't really give a fuck who's his father. And then for most of the book, the narrative plays this game where the reader knows that her father is the Autumn King. You're able to guess that her father is the Autumn King, like from the very first mention that her father's an important person. But we play this game for like 600 plus pages where everyone just is talking about her father as this mysterious entity that no one could ever guess. And then when it's finally revealed that her father is the Autumn King, all of these characters are like, what the fuck? Where did that come from? And I'm like, have you been like not here the entire book? Because I thought that part was, that was a really annoying moment for me personally. Hunt as a love interest was another sore spot for me. I initially didn't care for him. I went in expecting to appreciate him, if for no other reason. Then by the time I started my live stream buddy read, I had already seen fan art. Like, I started it, a week ago at this point. So I was aware of the aesthetic of the character. I was aware that I wasn't going to get a sex scene with them until late on in the book. But I was vaguely thinking I would support him. But from the moment he's introduced, I really felt that he had a lot of anger issues that he needed to work through. I think like the second time we meet him, he was like banging on the door, and he was it wasn't for me. It wasn't like, I'm sorry, but super angry male characters like that as love interests just don't make sense to me. I also think that there's like this weird disconnect in the bookish community where people will tweet that behavior like that isn't it, and then it pops up in the book like that, and they're like, oh, I'm so he can take me. And I'm like, weren't you just tweeting like 3 seconds ago about how that's not cute? Like, just for what? For some angel dick? No. And then his dick game is weak. He never even pulls it out. Like, that's a whole other story, because let's get into the heart of this, the investigation narrative. So most of this book is about Bryce and Hunt teaming up together to work on the, case of Danica's murder. So in the prologue material, this is the issue I had. So in the prologue material, we've established that Bryce is on the lookout for this super important magical object that was stolen prior to the events of the book. So Bryce works in an antiquity shop. This is obviously an antiquity, and she wants to be able to find it. Her boss is like on the hunt for it, like she wants to get this. At this point in the narrative, Bryce is still on party girl mode. She is, in the club getting some bathroom dick. She is, agreeing to go on this date with Connor, who I thought was, again, a trash character, but apparently people were sad when he died. And I was like, what? Okay. And then after he died, apparently, the entire city turned against Bryce, even though this was nowhere in the text until it was dropped in at, like, page 400, that everyone in the city had heard about how she was getting fucked in the bathroom while her friends were getting murdered, and the entire city was turning against her. And I was like, is that why Bryce is a boring character? Because after the prologue material, Bryce is like seemingly not caring at all that her friends are dead. Like, she hasn't spent any time trying to avenge them. Like, she's like, oh yeah, that human terrorist organization, they killed her, they had beef, I guess that's it. And it's like, so you were just going with it until they popped in and were like, yeah, those human terrorists that we were talking about, they had nothing to do with anything that's going on in the story. So, Bryce, we want your help. And when the governor of this little city, I think Micah's the governor, the little ruling person, the ruling archangel Micah, he came and was like, we want you to help us investigate what happened to your friend. It felt very Saturday morning cartoon. That was why I don't like this being in the adult section, because I don't think this book really tackled anything adult-like. I don't think that there was any complexity to the themes. I don't think there was any exploration of any nuance or layers. Like, Bryce was a party girl whose friend died, and then she just went on existing as though nothing. I mean, she stopped, like, doing things that she enjoyed. She was, like, suffering because her friend had died. Again, it was very standard YA tropes in, like, City and how she was dealing with this death. And then towards, like, page 500 or something, she was getting a procedure to take some venom out of her leg. And she was like, oh, I'd been limping for 2 years because Danica was dead and I was against, like, it was stupid. The whole situation was fucking stupid. So, back to the investigation that was going on in the prologue, where she was meant to be looking for this antiquity. Homegirl spent 2 years and didn't find it, okay? So the fact that she was, you know, not really torn up about Danica's death in the sense that she wasn't already out here trying to avenge nobody. She wasn't trying to, like, break into the prison and kill this human terrorist. She was like, he can rot in prison, I guess. And the fact that she had already allegedly spent 2 years of her life looking for this horn and didn't find it, like, Homegirl was not the person to ask for an investigation. It added to the Saturday morning cartoon vibes of it. As for the actual investigation plotline, again, I feel like Lady Midnight did it better. And it's not that Crescent City does it poorly, I just didn't care. I felt that the entire middle part of the book, while in retrospect, is probably the better part of the book. I also feel that the writing there was very inconsistent. So, in between the murder mystery aspects, you had this forced proximity trope with Hunt and Bryce to establish them as, like, a couple plot line situation, right? So, I think it was in the prologue material, Sarah J. Maas established how characters in this world could become immortal. So even though supernatural characters exist when they're born and they're just living their life, they're not automatically having these super long lifespans. So at some point they take a test, they understand how long they're going to live, how much power they're going to have, and then at some point in their adulthood, they make the drop where they stop aging or their aging slows dramatically, and killing them becomes infinitely times harder. If, like, limbs get chopped off, no matter what your species is, apparently you just grow it back. Like, again, it's very difficult to kill these people. We know that this is a method that exists, and we know that in the prologue material, neither Danica or Bryce had made the drop. They were planning on doing it at some point in the future together. It was going to be a cute moment. So, fast forward, Danica's dead, Bryce is somehow on this investigation, and Sarah J. Maas has this thing where she insists on Bryce being this super amazing detective. So when the investigation kicks off, we have this scene where Hunt is following her, and it looks like she's just doing a bunch of stupid, like, boring, mundane things, even though Bryce's life is in danger. And then at the end of her day, she's like, boop, haha, see, look at me, I'm a master investigator. I did all of this shit and you didn't even know it. You just thought I was getting my nails done. And I was like, okay, standard mystery trope, I get it, whatever. But as the investigation goes on, her life is increasingly in danger. She is out here surviving attacks that Danica didn't survive. And even though Danica at the time of her death hadn't made the drop, Danica was significantly more powerful than Bryce was. She was significantly more powerful, and she was significantly more just, like, trained in general. She was out here, like, Danica's life was in danger on a more consistent basis before she died than Bryce's was. So even though Bryce was by no means, like, a terrible fighter or anything, like, she was still half human, and she still wasn't out here utilizing her skills every day in the way that Danica was. And yet Danica died, right? Like, we know that Danica was murdered by this thing that they're investigating, and somehow Bryce is consistently escaping these situations. And it's like, homegirl, you've been established as the weakest link. I know you're not going to end the book that way, but right now where we are in the narrative, homegirl, you're the weakest link. And somehow your ass is out here surviving. Like, this thing has wounded actual fucking archangels who have, like, again, some of the longer lifespans, some of the most powerful characters in the book, and you're surviving? Like, you're surviving these attacks. Like, it got to a point where it was like, Why is she surviving these things? Why is she consistently in danger? Why is she consistently refusing to, like, take the drop? Like, the only reason Hunt was in her apartment was because the book established her as the weakest link. They were like, homegirl, you're in danger. You need someone to protect you. And she was like, well, I'm not going to have my brother move in. Hunt, you can move in. And it's like, the character that I thought I was going to get would be like, fuck both of you. I'm going to do the drop. And then Hunt being there, he wouldn't need to be there. He just wouldn't. There would be no reason for him to be there. And so I felt that a lot of the choices weren't being made for the characters, but so we could have these forced proximities, we could have them get to know each other, and even then, all of those moments where they're getting to know each other felt like a distraction from the actual murder mystery. Now, even though I wasn't invested in their investigation, because it was quickly apparent that Sarah J. Maas, much like Cassandra Clare, much like Robert Galbraith, Karen and McManus, much like Karen and McManus and all those other people, this was not a story you were going to follow along, guess the killer, be like, woohoo, I got it. Do I think you could have guessed who the eventual antagonist was? Sure. Like, I'm sure you could. Like, I don't think it was, out of left field completely. I don't think the clues weren't there, but as was constructed, you were just along for the ride. I don't think you were like, I'm going to pick up clues and guess along with you. That kind of a vibe. So while they're out here doing all these investigations, we would stop and they'd be like, okay, now we're going to have a character moment for Bryce and Hunt. And it's like, you've established this man has anger issues. He is not working on those anger issues. He and Bryce are not, like, they're not complex characters. They're very static. They are still the same person I met 5 years ago. But also, establishing them with a romantic interest, like, with each other, felt very at odds because Hunt was consistently, like, literally every other thought he had was about his ex-lover, woman, person, who I think was also his master, or she was like the leader in the rebellion that cost him, to have the halo on his forehead that was limiting his powers. He was like, she was my one true love, she was the person I love the most, like, why am I gonna be like, oh, so you're like, I'm reading you tell me that you love this other character who is now dead, who's been dead for thousands of years, that was your one true, and I'm having to read all of these flashback moments between Bryce and Danica that establish them as being more than just platonic, and you want me to then read these character moments where you want me to, like, root for them to be smashing? I can't. And I was really sad because I don't think, I said this in my live streams, but over the course of the novel, I didn't really think that Bryce's main conflict was finding who killed Danica, because she was at peace for like 2 years. Like, she was good. It didn't work. The investigation didn't work for me. The world building didn't work for me. And then all of that, I think I could have forgiven. I think that it would never have been over a 3-star read. I think it could have been a 4-star. It could have. It would have been a stretch for me. It would have been more on enjoyment than actual execution. But even though I've talked now for like 20 minutes about everything that I hated and all the issues that I had with how the narrative was constructed, I think that all of that I could have forgiven if the third act hadn't completely fallen apart. So let's talk the third act. Now, if there is a part of this book that I would say is objectively confusing, the third act would be it. I had some serious reading comprehension issues with what was happening in the third act. So let's talk about it. So we are coming to the end of the investigation. We've had some red herrings, like we thought for a moment Sabine had done it. We had all of these revelations about Danica that Bryce hadn't known, and it was like, you know what, girl, maybe you weren't Danica's best friend. Maybe you weren't as good a girlfriend as I thought you were. Bryce, Hunt are separated. Hunt is at the summit, which has been this thing that's been lurking in the background. It's obviously an important gathering of all of the important officials of over all of the different supernatural people who live in the city. So it's like it's all the power players are there, but our girl Bryce is at work. Very vague understanding is our antagonist comes into her place of employment. We find out that who orchestrated Danica's death? Micah. What? We were all shook, shocked, and shaken. Didn't see it coming. Okay, he's here. He's also here to tell us that that horn, the artifact, that antiquity, wow, the antiquity that Bryce had been searching for in the prologue material, that had been a major plot point in the second half of the book, was actually crushed down and consumed by our homegirl Bryce. She has become one with this super powerful horn that Micah wants to activate, so all of these demons can flood into the city and like kill everybody, and I don't know, he can like rule the people. I don't know. But that was my understanding of the thing. And what follows, I felt, was the, again, really confusing thing for me to understand. So, while Micah is walking Bryce through her step-by-step, his step-by-step plan of how he killed Danica, or how he, tricked Danica into all of these different things, and she was like low-key a pawn, and he was doing all of these dastardly things, that culminated in Danica killing the pack and then ripping herself apart, all to like, again, activate this stupid fucking horn that Danica was trying to keep from him, or whatever. Eventually, there's like an altercation between Micah and Bryce that leads to like her like almost drowning. I didn't really understand what was happening. Like, she was like almost drowning, and then she wasn't drowning, and then the fire sprite, who had been, I guess, kind of a cute side character, was like sacrificing herself so Bryce could get away, except Bryce wasn't running away. She was like she was she was like going to like get a gun, and then she shot Micah, and then she cut his head off, and then she burned him alive, and then she vacuumed up his ashes, all before the fire department could get to her. Again, unrealistic. And while all of this is going on, all the power players at the summit are watching this, because she had like called Jessica, or Jessica was like watching on the thing. And so then they put it up on all the screens. So everyone is watching Bryce kill not just like an angel, but like the leader of the city. And the leader of the city had just confessed to this horrible crime. And so then like the other important archangel lady is like, well, we're gonna kill Bryce because she just killed the governor. And Hunt is like working with the queen of the fucking witches or whatever. And so she like removes his halo, which I'm like, why would you just remove his halo? But whatever. I mean, Micah's dead, so I guess I think that was why. And so she was like, sure, I'll help you out. And so then he like kills the other important angel lady, but the demons have already come into the city. And so at this point, I'm like, what am I reading? City of Heavenly Fire? Like, what is this? Fucking Queen of, like, what is it, Air and Darkness? Like, we got just a bunch of demons traipsing through the portals. And so Bryce is like wounded, because again, she was almost drowned. She has like I think she got like stabbed in her arm or something. She's flinging blood apparently, but she's running through the city like, oh no, I'm gonna close all the gates, or I don't know what the fuck she was trying to do. Anyway, at some point she decides she's just gonna make the drop. And I'm like, you ain't got no anchor. Everyone in the book is like, bitch, you ain't got no anchor. And she's like, I don't care, I'm gonna make the drop. Meanwhile, Hunt is like laying there next to her dead. He was like in a helicopter, and there was like a bomb. It was stupid. Like, he was about to die. I was like, you know what? At this point, I was a little confused, because I was like, how is he about to die when this is meant to be a series? But I don't care. I don't like that man. Let him die. Oh, that's what happened. Like, the other angel lady that Hunt killed had like ordered a bomb or something. And so he shielded her from the bomb, but in the process, he got all kinds of fucked up. And then she was like, I'm gonna make the drop now. And I'm like, okay, bitch, but you ain't got no anchor. Everyone else in the book is like, bitch, you ain't got no anchor. She makes the drop anyway. She is like falling and falling and falling, and she gets to the bottom of her power, and Danica's there, and I'm like, girl, you're dead. You're a fucking spirit. What are you doing here? They have like a girl power moment. They're talking to each other. They're, I don't know, kikiing. Meanwhile, we have all these other perspectives going on where it's like, the Autumn King is like, I don't care if she got more power than me. She was stupid. She made the drop with a fucking ghost. She gonna die. Like, she ain't coming back from that. She can't pull herself up from that. And what does she do? She pulls herself up from it. She just becomes she's like, through love, anything is possible. Which is what's been tattooed on her back this entire time. And I'm like, first of all, you do not love Hunt, so I'm not even going to apply that to her. Like, that's just not going to happen. But also, you're thinking that right after your conversation with Danica, which you have a matching tattoo with, whose tattoo also said, through love, all is possible. There is no heterosexual explanation for this event. But again, there's the world-breaking magnitude of just coming up from the drop by yourself, which has never been done before, ever, by anybody, even though, who was it? I think the Shifter Prime was like, he can happen, there are stories. Anyway, Homegirl comes up, she closes the gate, she saves the day, she heals Hunt, all is well in the world. And I'm sitting here thinking, one, this is a hot-ass mess. I barely understood a third of what is happening here. But even what I did understand, I understood was the first time this shit's ever been done before. I understand that this ain't never gonna happen again. And then, after all of this, we get like a couple of days later or something. I don't know. Time skips ahead. And the Asteri, who were like the most powerful supreme leaders of the continent, show up. And they're like, yeah, we're not gonna kill you, but you just can't let anybody know what you did. And I'm like, how does anybody not know what this bitch just did? It was giving me very, like, dystopian vibes. And I was like, first of all, we already failed this urban fantasy genre. Second of all, this book was already entirely too long. Third of all, we already had a complete story arc, so where's the series potential? And fourth of all, to tie it all together with dystopian vibes, nobody asked for that. Nobody wants your weird, angelic, supernatural dystopian. Nobody has ever been on book Twitter going, you know what I want? I want a high fantasy, urban fantasy, dystopian mashup. 0 people. So then, after 797 pages, 707 pages of actual content, 90 pages of prologue content, we get a 2-page epilogue that is meant to like set up this thing where Bryce isn't who she like appears to be. Jessica is like out here talking, thinking, like laying this groundwork for her to be this other character. And I'm like, what is this? Throwing a fucking glass. And then the Prince of Hell, who I actually liked. He was one of the highlights of the little middle part of the book. I was like, get on his dick. The Prince of Hell, Mr. Devil Daddy, popped up out of nowhere and was like, I'm here too. And the book was over. And so I was like, we had too long of a prologue. That epilogue was not enough after what you just gave us in a standalone. And so at the end of the day, I think this was just trash. And I think that part of it is, like, Lady Midnight had a similar problem where the narrative was self-contained and it had a very brief epilogue to push us into a sequel. And again, I felt that that sequel was very lackluster. And so I think that I don't understand why Sarah J. Maas would look to Lady Midnight and just write her own version. And at the end of the day, the lesser version. And I don't understand why it was this long. That's really my point here, is that I know people are like, oh, it's adult fantasy. Adult fantasy is long. Again, Steel Crow Saga is a much shorter book. Again, Steel Crow Saga is a standalone. But even if I weren't looking at that, I think that it's just better. It's a better narrative. It tells a whole story. It's a more complex story. I don't think there's anything complex that's really at work here. I think that there's a lot of information thrown at you, and a lot of it you don't need, and a lot of it you don't, like the first 90 pages you really don't need. I think you could cut that you could cut that literally to be the chapter where Danica dies, and then we have the flash forwards. At the end of the day, I don't think this is a terrible book. As someone who has only ever read Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, I think that starting here is a terrible idea. I think that there is literally nothing to be gained from starting here. Not because I think it's a terrible book or that it's poorly written, even though, again, we sat through this whole video together, right? But I think this book is just entirely too long. I think that it's probably a better idea to start with an ACOTAR or a Throne of Glass, where the work is a little bit shorter and you can kind of get a vibe. And then if you're enjoying that, then by all means dive into this. And I'm not going to say that you might not enjoy this more, but I just think that it's, one, a more pricey investment as an adult hardcover. So I'm going to end this here. Thank you all for watching. Down below in the description you will find links to all of my social media, as well as a non-spoiler review of the book, just in case, you know, you want to read my thoughts on it there. It's a little bit more concise. If you liked what you saw here, you want to see more, you can click the subscribe button, hit the like button. If you didn't like it, feel free to dislike the video. If you've read Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood, make sure to leave your thoughts in the comment section below. But I'll see you guys again soon in another video, whenever that happens to be. But until then, and until next time, bye.